Okay, so the thoracic cavity. What is everything you can tell me about the thoracic cavity?
It's home to the heart. It's above the diaphragm.
Is that it?
It's above the diaphragm. Maybe.
Is that it?
It's a lung in it too.
It has the heart and the lungs in it. Now, can you be more specific than that with another cavity?
The M probably.
Okay.
Mediastinum.
Okay. Whether you say mediastinum or mediastinum, why is that important?
Because that is home to the heart.
That's what it. That is accurate, but more so anatomically speaking, why is that important? Yes, I understand the heart is important, but because of where it sits, that answers a few questions about why the lungs sit in the thoracic cavity the way they do. Okay? It has something to do with the bronchial tree. Because of how the heart is placed in the mediastinum within the thoracic cavity. Excuse me. That is important because as the trachea splits in two on the bronchial tree, why is that significant once that splits? One of them is more vertical than the other.
The right is more vertical than the left.
That is correct, but why? You're saying what it is, but why is that the case though?
Because of the lungs placement.
True. More so the heart's placement. Okay? Because in that mediastinum, is the heart more so to the right side or more so to the left side of that entire thoracic cavity? Why does it have to be on the left? Because if it sits further to the left, why would the bronchial tree be, let's say, more steep, if you want to call it that? Okay? So if this is a trachea, okay, we'll make it nice and wide, and okay, why would, okay, there should be an opening there too, or else they're not going to be able to breathe. Okay. Okay. So a patient comes to, or a child comes to the ER. The doctor is probably going to do, if they can, probably take an x-ray. Okay. But should they need to take a 50-50 guess, that's not quite right. There we go. Which side of the lungs are they looking at, the left or the right? Why would they look at the right side?
Because the right bronchi is more vertical than
Right.
the left.
And that is because this is the entire thoracic cavity. Okay? And then because of the how the lungs sit in here, okay, would explain, I guess, probably a dotted line, okay? And that would explain that particles or objects would end up in the right lung more so than the left. It's because of how the heart sits inside the mediastinum. Okay, so then one side is slightly larger than the other. So which lung is larger, the right or the left? That's correct. Okay, because the left side has how many lobes? And the right side, there we go. All right. So, moving forward, how is it that the lungs expand? Is it because of the muscular action of the lungs? It's got to contract or open up somehow, right? Can you be a little more specific with which muscular tissue? So when we say pericardium, okay, so the heart is contracting and beating, that will initiate respiration. You're going to go like this. Hey, I knew this. Or maybe it's not asked. The diaphragm will do that. Correct. Because why can the lungs not expand on their own? Because when we think expansion and contraction, we think muscular tissue, but the lungs cannot do that on their own. Why is that? Yeah, they don't have muscular tissue. It's the airflow coming in and out of the lungs that will cause them to expand and contract. That's right. There was a chemistry problem yesterday that dealt with that. Okay, that because as your diaphragm pulls downward, okay, the atmospheric pressure inside of your lungs really drops. Or excuse me, the pressure inside the lungs drops below atmospheric pressure. So according to Boyle's law, if pressure is going down, what's volume going to do? Okay, it's an inverse proportion, and that's why air flows into your lungs. You don't suck it in like flipping a switch on a vacuum. It's a motor that causes that. We're not a machine in that matter, except for maybe our ladies track team. They're a machine. That's awesome. Okay, and whether you're on the base pads or you're on the track, if you run like you're late for science, it's zoom, away you go. I doubt you're thinking that. Probably not. Okay. Or if you hit the ball far enough, you don't have to worry about how fast you run. Okay, so moving forward then. So how does air get from the lungs into the bloodstream? But the process. You're not totally wrong, but what process causes that? You're going to say again, I knew that. How does air get from the tissue inside your lungs into the bloodstream? It's a process that you learned in biology. That's why I backed up quick, because it was on the slide. Yeah, the process of movement of particles from a higher concentration to a lower concentration occurs here. That's right. So then, why is it that we would say, why are the alveoli so much smaller than, let's say, the bronchi? We put that drawing up on the board yesterday, and what could you presume from that drawing?
The surface area was much bigger when you have separate things instead of one big thing.
That's correct, because if you have lots of tiny air sacs as opposed to one big circle, your mathematically speaking, your surface area increases tenfold, 20-fold. I don't know what you could say the mathematics behind that is, and that's why we're designed the way we are. The man upstairs had a plan. Or is it the woman upstairs? Do we have a preference for that? Okay. The person upstairs? The man upstairs? Okay. Man upstairs had a pretty good plan. Okay. So here's that mediastinum again, or monastium, however you want to pronounce that. Okay. So at the alveoli structure, what type of blood vessels are surrounding that alveoli.
Capillaries.
Why?
Because they have the most pressure.
The pressure is probably significant, but it's not as high as you would think.
They're one cell layer.
Yeah, they're one cell layer thick, otherwise this would not be able to take place. That's right. Okay. So as we stated earlier, the right lung is just slightly larger than the left because there are 3 lobes as opposed to the left side. Okay? And again, why is that explained? It has something to do with mediastinum. Because of how the heart sits in that thoracic cavity. That's right. Okay? So if what would be perhaps someone might say, oh my gosh, I had a family member diagnosed with pleurisy. That could be, what could you presume that pleurisy would possibly mean by this? Because we linked it to the fluid that surrounds your brain and spinal cord, which was what? Starts with an M. That's meningitis, which means an inflammation. We don't say pleuritis, you might say pleurisy. So if that's the case, what's happening with that fluid? It might have inflammation in there, which might cause respiration to be a little more difficult. Okay, because the reason for that is just like around the pericardium. In that pericardial sac, is there fluid that surrounds your heart? Yes. So we see the same thing here. It just works to reduce that friction. But if it becomes inflamed, then because maybe of an infection or something to that effect, breathing might be a little more difficult then. All right. So just like that chemistry problem we talked about yesterday and briefly talked about this at the beginning of the hour, okay, the pressure inside the lungs will drop below atmospheric pressure. Can we halt this? Can we stop those nerve impulses from reaching the diaphragm? Well, you got a 50-50 chance. So typically, the best way for me to explain this is was it all weekend, would you say that was humid? And when you're playing your softball games, is it humid outside? Last few days, it's been pretty humid. What about running yesterday? Did it feel humid? It probably did. Okay? So the reason something like that might be significant is when that humidity really ratchets up like that, if you're going down the road or you're standing out here in the outfield, infield, whichever, you think, oh my God, it is so humid and the wind is just from the right direction. I can smell that pig farm or that cattle farm down the road. That happens during the spring and summertime. So if you don't want to inhale those scent particles, what might you do? Try not to pass out.
Hold your breath.
Is that possible?
Well, you can.
You can, okay? So, don't do that though, but you can because even if you're in a vehicle going out, God, I don't want to smell this, so you take a deep breath and you can hold your breath. You can consciously halt this. okay? But your brain is going to sense something very significant. What is going to start to build up in your bloodstream fairly quickly? It can't be oxygen because you're not breathing. I suppose you could say that's a side effect, but what is the opposite of not taking in oxygen? You're not getting rid of what? You're not getting rid of carbon dioxide. So that's going to build up into your bloodstream. And there's different types of aspects that carbon dioxide building up can be a problem. And I don't know if we'll get to that today. Let's just look at the end here. Okay. Once CO2 levels have fallen, respiratory rates will, okay, as a result, more oxygen taken in and more carbon dioxide is in. This must be, okay, this is going to be monitored by your cerebral spinal fluid. So if you're holding your breath, that is going to monitor the blood gases inside, and it's going to cause you to take a deep breath like that, should something like that happen. Okay. So this is where we were, right? Okay. So let's do this one. And expiration, expiration. And let's get through the process of expiration then. Okay? Then we'll call it a day. Then that gives us next week to get this wrapped up and be ready for the 23rd and 24th, or 22nd and 23rd, whatever those 2 dates are.
So, is this just this test, like this chapter? Or the semester test?
We talked about it yesterday.
It wasn't on the science channel, though.
It probably wasn't. Yeah. And that remains to be seen. Because I think everyone would agree that this was not your typical school year. Okay, so this says air is forced into the lungs. Why is that? What's forcing air into the lungs? Muscular action cannot do this. Because you also have to take into account, okay, as this enlarges, what's happening inside the lungs pressure-wise? As the diaphragm pulls down, okay, in inspiration, which means is air coming in or going out in inspiration? The tricky part about this is if you're talking about the avian class, birds, their respiratory system is so advanced, it doesn't matter in their respiratory cycle. They're getting oxygen whether they're breathing in or breathing out because they have air sacs. We don't have air sacs. Okay. Why not? Because we don't need to migrate thousands of miles. Yeah. So just think, if we had the respiratory system like that of birds, I don't know if we'd ever really get tired as far as taking in oxygen. It's because it's just that efficient, which it has to be. It has to be that efficient, in other words, to fuel those demands those muscles have. So what we see happening here, okay, if the pressure inside the lungs, if it drops, why is air forced into the lungs then? Because what did we say Boyle's law tells you? The pressure has dropped, so the volume has to be going So if it's going up, air is forced into the lungs because of that pressure differential. That's right. Okay. So then just the opposite, forcing air out, as you can see, is that of expiration. I don't know if you have to write anything. This does not look right. This occurs from the diaphragm relaxing. The intercostal muscles would be contracting. Okay? I can make that note right now. Come on. So the diaphragm then relaxes, and then these intercostal muscles are then contracting, okay? Because if that volume is starting to go down, according to Boyle's law, what's the pressure going to do? So if it goes above atmospheric pressure, is that going to stay in, or is that going to force air out? If it's above atmospheric pressure now, it will go out then. Okay. And is that it for this? One more, and then that's it for today. And this is why on that previous slide that we want to make that change is that these intercostal muscles have to be contracting to force that air out because of the pressure differential. So how is this even possible with the rib cage? Don't bones that provide protection at the vital centers of the human body, don't those form immovable joints? Like the cranium has immovable joints. That has a very vital function of not moving and providing protection for the brain.
The ribs are movable because you needed them to move and able to do CPR.
Okay?
And I still
Freely movable?
no.
So they're immovable then.
No, they're like partially. I'll sew it again.
You're not too far off. That would be acceptable. You're slightly correct. Slightly movable joints. That's right. Is there any other place there's slightly movable joints? They would be attached to the rib cage, but not the sternum. What could the ribs possibly attach to on the posterior side? Specifically, which ones? That's all of them, though. You sure?
Yeah.
Are you asking us or telling us? Well, that didn't sound very confident. Yeah, it's the thoracic vertebrae that would do that. Okay, so next week we will again wrap this up fairly easily because we are on slide 24 of 28, which means this one will be 25, and we will get this wrapped up and to give us time to finish any loose ends. Okay, it's an important weekend. Just think this will be you ladies next year. Okay? And with that, we'll catch up to you next time.